Are you guys feeling it a little bit? Like, do you see what's going on out there? You know, like all the other financial markets, stocks are going crazy. Crypto is going crazy. Bitcoin halving is coming this year and people are ready. They got their ticket to the moon. They're ready to go nuts. Now the question is, are comic books going to hitch a ride? Are comic books going to go with them? Well, as of right now, it doesn't look like it because we got ourselves an update for the index, the comic book index for the month of February. And while we haven't quite gone to the moon yet, I don't know. Something feels a little bit different. Who am I kidding? We're going to zero. Comic books are worthless. Journey into Mystery, number 1. Did you guys know that this is the actual first appearance of the character Death? Like Thanos' Death, Jim Starlin. Marvel Bronze Horror. Underrated? Rated? Overrated? I don't know, but I kind of like them now. Anyways, before I get into the video, if you guys could like, comment, subscribe, I'd appreciate it. Helps support the channel, doing all those things. But let us get into this video here today. You guys know what it is. It is March already. So I had to give you guys the comic book index update. What is the comic book index? Well, it's the top 100 sold books per age, silver, bronze, and copper. I take the highest volume of grade. That's the one that I focus on. I take the final sale of each month, aka the market close. I get all of this info from GPA data and I calculate it all together. So suffice to say, if I were to buy the top 100 most in-demand, most common popular books out there in the comic book market, how much would it cost me on a month-by-month basis? Last month in the Silver Age Index 100, we were at the high price of $46,655. That was the highest price we have actually seen in the last 4 months or so. At that time, it seemed like comic books were back. It seemed like the Moon Boys were here to play. Well, where do we go in this shorter month of February? Actually, it was a little bit of a longer month of February. We got that one extra day with the 29th. But where do we go after a booming month in January? Well, we actually slid a little bit down to the 44,707 range. A little bit of a pullback, but not by much. And as you guys can see, still higher than that of the 4 months prior. It's very, very interesting. On the one hand, you can sort of look at this as like, you know, hey, we're still trending downward, you know, over the long view. But if you kind of section it off to, you know, these last 4 or 5 months, I mean, we're actually on a little bit of an uptrend, if that's how you want to frame it, if you're a little more of a moon boy here. So we could be putting in higher lows and then maybe higher highs after that. It depends on how you want to look at it. But I would say that at the 44,707 range, I mean, that's a pretty healthy place for the Silver Age comic books to be in, especially since we've been on the schneid for so long. All right, let's move forward here to the Bronze Age Index. Of course, last month we were at the $34,806 range, which was a little bit of an uptick from the prior month, which was, you know, the lowest month that we've actually had in, you know, the last 3.5 years or so. Well, where do we go here in the month of February? Well, once again, we actually did slide down to the $33,906 range, which is lower than that of what we got in December, making this the new record low for Bronze Age comic books. And this one's really interesting to think about and take a look at. I mean, the Bronze Age Index has definitely been beaten up for a long time now. And if actually you go back to the 2020 times, you can actually see that maybe this section right here, you know, in May and June of 2020, or starting in May of June of 2020, this part got a little bit inflated. Perhaps there's a little bit of froth in the Bronze Age Index overall. I mean, what kind of books come to mind when we think about this time frame? I mean, She-Hulk #1, you know, ASM 101, first appearance of Madam Web, you know, Moon Knight, Eternals, all these types of books. You know, perhaps there was a lot of speculative value that got injected into that time frame, and that's really why we keep seeing month after month a little bit of that stuff getting pulled out. And perhaps it's this 26,852 range, you know, kind of when COVID sort of started, that we have to sort of be eyeballing as sort of the new possible low for this particular index to hit. But, you know, it's really interesting. I don't necessarily think that we're going to go that far down, although that's what the trend has been showing us. And, you know, don't fight the trend. I mean, the trend is your friend. But let's table that discussion, save it for later, and go over now to the Copper Age Index. In January, we were at the $22,741 level. And much like the Bronze Age, that was one of the lowest numbers we have seen for this index in the last 3 years or so. Well, where do we go here in the month of February? February, and well, once again, we dropped down to the $21,753 range. And much like bronze, I mean, if we're looking at these graphs, I mean, what did we see here back in 2020? We saw a little bit of a premature inflate going all the way back to May and June of 2020, where you can see like the graph really start to skyrocket. And again, what do we think about, when we think about this index? We think a lot of Venom keys, we think a lot of Carnage keys, we think a lot of, ASM 252s and black suits and all that sort of stuff that probably got specced on too much. So maybe there's still a lot of froth. Although, as I've discussed many times before, the Copper Age Index is not really something that has ever really been proven to show a year-over-year return. I mean, for many years, it was very, very flat, as you guys can see there in 2018 and 2019. But let me flash forward and quickly talk about the key takeaways here so that we can kind of really unpack everything later on in the video. Well, January 2024 for Silver Age, we were at 46,655, dropping down to 44,707. In February, a decrease of 4%. January 2024 for Bronze Age, we are at 34,806, going down to 33,906, a decrease of 3%. And for Copper Age, we are at the $21,753 range, a decrease of 4%. Pretty much all of the indexes dropping at the same rate that they drop, which is, similar to the rate in which they increase going from December to January. Now, zooming in on some of the data, I think that this is very interesting. For silver book values, we only had 12% down this month. That's not a lot. I mean, while the index itself is correcting a little bit, maybe the 12% had bigger corrections to go with. But, as far as like how many books actually drop down, there's not too many, pretty stable overall, 15% up, which is a good number, and 24% non-sale. It's really the non-sale factor. As soon as we start to get, more people, just more demand buying up stuff, we're going to see the index go up for sure. Bronze book value is very interesting here, 15% down, 15% up, and 15% non-sale. So very, very healthy kind of numbers for that index, which is why it makes me feel like the biggest drops have sort of already happened. I mean, maybe we can sort of bleed out, for the next 6 months to 12 months or whatever it is, month after month. But, as far as like a very steep decline, some of the stuff that we were feeling in 2022 and 2023, I'm willing to say that stuff is probably over, and most people would be willing to just hold on to their books and not let them go for, half the value at this particular point. All right, let's jump forward to the month by month graph. This is my favorite one to take a look at. Of course, we are currently in 2024. That is the purple line right there, smack dab in the middle. And you can see that February was a bit of a down month compared to that of January. Well, if I'm comparing it to 2023 and 2022, I'm going to assume that March is going to be an up month. In fact, every single year dating back to 2018, March has been a bigger spending month than that of February. And I think that there's probably many reasons for that. I mean, I think, now we're starting to get into the springtime. People are starting to get, excited about, some of the comic book movies. February is a shorter month, so there's just going to be less days for people to actually buy comic books. So that's always going to play a factor as well. And I still am of the opinion that, our 2024 may look very similar to that of the 2023 line, where, for the most part, it's going to slowly trickle out throughout the calendar year, but it's not necessarily going to have the big drops that we saw in 2022 and 2021. And even if it does continue to bleed out throughout the rest of the year, I don't think it's going to drop that far below that of the yellow line, which is 2020. I still am pretty convinced that we're going to be staying above 2020, 2019, and 2018 levels, at least for that of the Silver Age books, which are the ones that we are focusing on. And the reason I think that is because of the trend line. I mean, again, this is not really drawn to scale, but we've generally seen with silver book values, they kind of rise with the rate of inflation. And while we're in this macro economy environment and while things are going down and we're in tough economic times, I mean, I do still think, inflation is still going up. So, the comic book values are still going to be able to hold, some of their floor above that of previous years. At least that's the working theory for the next maybe decade or so before, the kids don't care about comic books and everyone is using their Bitcoin to buy NFTs or whatever you want to call them. Of course, I always show this chart, the psychology of the investor. Maybe we're still in the despair phase. Maybe we're in the return to mean. Really hard to say. I mean, are we going to hit the takeoff point later on the year? Well, that depends. If you are an actual bear or a bull, here we have to round out the video with the bear and the bull case, the moon boys versus the bear bros. I mean, I think the most interesting thing to me is what is happening right now in all of the other markets. Now, I know that you guys don't like to talk about this stuff and you guys are all very allergic to like crypto and stuff. I'm just sharing this stuff with you guys because I think that it has a tremendous effect on what happens with values of comic books. I think that there's a lot of people that have crypto, that are crypto millionaires, that get involved in this stuff and they make tons of money, and then they decide, hey, I want to buy an AF-15, and they don't care what they pay for it. They're just willing to buy it with all their crypto winnings. And right now, crypto is absolutely pumping. Even though, we have everything going on with the economy, even though a lot of people still talk about hard landing later on this year, even though a lot of people are still talking about how a crash is going to come. I mean, maybe that will happen. I mean, I don't really know. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't see the future. But as of right now, a lot of these other markets are pumping because everyone is feeling like, we might be getting that soft landing. I mean, there's already people talking about how we're going to have 3 interest rate cuts later on this year. And that's why things are doing so well in these other economic markets, is because it's the predictability. Like, everyone is assuming that we're going to cut rates and that things are going to start to come down. And then eventually, like, the market's going to recover and, we're all going to be, millionaires in 2025 and 2026. And that's why people are more willing, to pick up stocks and crypto and all these sort of stuff. Now, there's other indications like yield curve and all this stuff that shows us that we might be getting a recession soon. There's people getting laid off. There's things like that. But it's really hard to say. And then it all depends on, does this stuff really have any correlation with the values of comic books? In my opinion, I do actually think that there is some correlation here. I mean, when people have more money, when they have more disposable income, they like to buy things like collectibles. They like to spend money on this type of stuff. So that might make its way into our comic books. And again, I share all this information with you guys so that you guys can sort of decide, like, hey, do I think now is a good time to buy that key I want for my comic book collection? Do I think now is a good time to let go of this book that, I no longer want in my collection? It's really just information for you guys to decide on how you want to operate with your collecting goals. And to me, it just seems like we are in a very interesting place right now. I mean, nobody knows where things are going, but I do think that in the short term, we could feel a lot of crazy buying and euphoria in comic books because of the crypto stuff, because of those things. And then maybe if Deadpool is a really good movie and people get excited and the speculators go speculate, in that time frame, I think things could get crazy in the short term. But then I also think later on we could feel it, later on in the year in 2025 and things of that nature. So really interesting to take a look at all this stuff. That is my update for the comic book index for the month of February. What do you guys think? While this month was down, I suspect that next month is going to be a big month for comic book buying, comic book purchasing, and thus a big month for the comic book index. And if all of a sudden FOMO starts to settle in at that moment in time, it'll be interesting to see where we go from there. Anyways, that's all right for this video. Let me know what you guys think. Like, comment, subscribe. See you on the next one.